takes this fungal ball out of this guy's nose, puts it on a sterile paper, and the colony continued to make mycotoxins even out of his body. We got that out of his nose and did clean up, and this guy doesn't have Parkinson's anymore.
My name is Michael Rubino. I'm on a personal mission to make sure you don't get sick inside your own home.
I knew there was something wrong. I'm just so relieved there's something that you can do about it.
Hello, thank you for joining us for another episode of Never Been Sicker. I'm your host, Michael Rubino, and today's very, very special guest is a great friend of mine, an awesome human being, a pioneer, an advocate, everything you could ask for, helping to lead this torch and really help people with mold illness. And it is Dr. Jill Crista. Dr. Jill Crista, you could be doing a million and one things right now. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to be here with us.
It's my pleasure. Are you kidding? I would not miss a chance to chat with you, my friend. This is great.
So I want to dive right into the meat and potatoes here. And the very first question that I have for you is, so many people, when they're dealing with mold illness, they're, even if they remediate properly, even if they do all the things, when they start treatment, they're hitting a wall and they're, maybe they get a little bit better and they plateau, or they're just not fully being able to recover. And can you shed some light on why that might be?
I think one of the things that we have not understood well until recently is that every mycotoxin, it has its own way of getting out of the body. So if we're putting everybody on binders, which is a liver pathway, and your mycotoxin happens to be detoxified preferentially through the kidneys, we're not really offering the best treatment. And so I think when we can get more precise with the mycotoxin, how is it molecularly different? How does that then change where it goes in the body, what symptoms it causes? But more importantly, for getting better, how do we get it out of the body? And what do we support? I mean, we find some of them preferentially choose the gut and the gut microbiome. So it doesn't matter if you're on binders or not. And actually, binders could be getting in the way of detoxifying these. So if we can look at every mycotoxin, this is what I've spent years and years doing. I don't know anyone else is spending their weekends reading papers on chetoglobicin, but that's what I do. And try to figure out, okay, from the animal research, from the molecular research, understanding how we use those kinds of molecules in the body, how do we get them out? I've created these precision mycotoxin detoxification treatments. And it's a lot of the stuff that I was doing as a naturopath anyway. So I was getting farther along than maybe some of my colleagues. And that's when they started saying, would you just do a class on this? Would you just teach us what you're doing? And a lot of it was antifungals, which, not every mold treating doctor is very comfortable using. I'm very comfortable using it because I do understand that I don't have to only use the pharmaceuticals. I can use herbs and ideally both of them together if that's what we need. But it was a lot of the things I was doing to hold people together based on my fundamental training as a naturopathic doctor, which is make sure they're nourished with their essential fats, make sure their gut is balanced, with microbiome support, probiotics, make sure they have enough bioflavonoids to handle the inflammation. Well, it turns out when I was giving bioflavonoids to, quote, handle the inflammation, those same bioflavonoids enhance kidney clearance of certain mycotoxins. So I was getting better results because I was accidentally stumbled onto, by being a naturopathic doctor, detoxing them through a pathway that I was not really paying attention to until urine mycotoxin testing came along, which that's how long I've been doing this. And we could actually track then, wow, their mycotoxins go down a lot faster when I'm really good at giving them things for inflammation. Maybe this is inflammation tie. And then that's how I get into reading papers on mycotoxins. Then I realize, okay, there are certain mycotoxins that we really can't get out of the body through its preferred pathway unless we do certain things. So yeah, now I have every mycotoxin that you can test for, a precision pathway, supported pathway, detoxification pathway, and supportive supplements. That's what my next passion is, make it easy on everybody to get better and create some products so that they can just make this a shorter experience, shorter suffering, get better faster. I'm pretty impatient as a practitioner. So this is helping me just like boom, 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 boom. Let's move the needle faster. Let's get rid of the suffering. And then having partners like you, where, I listen to your podcast with Dr. Dennis, who's I'm so aligned with, and same with you, that the air is the most important part. The air is the biggest part, So I have what I call a 33-3 principle, which is you can go 30 days without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without air. So that tells us already when somebody is saying, what supplement should I take for blah, blah, blah? I'm like, well, let's start. Are you breathing? And then what air are you breathing? Because that's the most important nutrient that we need.
Yeah, it's so interesting because first off, you dropped a bomb, and I'm going to acknowledge that in a second. But it's so interesting that you start there, right? It's like it's the same kind of concept that I've come to realize myself. It's like air is so important to humans surviving and thriving, and it's often the last place we look, if we look at all. And so it's, obviously, you've been around the block, you've seen this happen so often that it's always on your radar, right? And it'd be great if it was on every doctor's radar across the entire world. Unfortunately, we know that that's not the case, but things are changing and things are getting better. But the bomb that you dropped was the fact that I truthfully don't think a lot of people are aware of this aspect. That when they're dealing with mycotoxins and they're trying to remove mycotoxins from the body, a lot of people, they just take these binders or these catch-all supplements. And it sounds to me like that's why a lot of people might be hitting these roadblocks, because maybe the binders that they're taking are not good for the specific mycotoxins that are in their body, or maybe there's other issues with them being able to detox those specific toxins from their body. And not a lot of people outside of you are really talking about this. So I think that's an extremely important thing. And I know you stumbled on it by accident. It's like we all seem to stumble on such great discoveries by accident, right? But that's huge. And you also created a supplement company called The Light. Mm-hmm. And I want you to tell us about that. And I also want you to tell us how you're using that opportunity to help people solve that unique problem that you've stumbled upon. Yeah,
that's so interesting to me that is a bomb, because when you get too much in the weeds in something, you forget that what's not going on in my head and what I know isn't what normal people know. But I am aware, I treat this condition pretty differently from a lot of other ways of training. And I'm sure it comes from my naturopathic background. But yeah, the different mycotoxins take different pathways to get out of the body. That concept that I've been developing for about the last 15 years of just like, how exactly then do they get out? What's the pathway? How do we support the pathway? And start with the thing we know they're exposed to. So before we even get into the nitty gritty of what genes do you have, where are your genes messed up, and where do we need to modify them? First, let's ask, how does that thing get out of the body? Is it even using the liver? I mean, of course, the liver is going to be using some of it, but if it's a preferential kidney toxin like ochratoxin, citrinin, zearalenone, if you're putting somebody with those mycotoxins on a binder, you're missing the boat. And then people say, oh, well, ochratoxin must be in all of our food because I keep seeing it on repeat labs. And my response is no, it's that you're not getting it out of the body because you're not choosing the right pathway. Yeah. So binders all day long, you're not going to touch those unless they're eating those. That's the other thing that I feel like I'm saying all the time is when we're paying attention to an inhalation exposure, something you're breathing, and some of the mycotoxins, all of them can go through the skin, but some are really good at getting through the skin, like the trichothecenes, through your eyes. That's why you should be wearing goggles if you go into a building. It goes through our respiratory passages into our blood. So it doesn't even go to the gut. So a lot of these times when we're looking at binder studies, these are studies that they're doing on animals when they know they're going to be feeding them moldy feed. That's a completely different unbound, unconjugated mycotoxin. Whereas when you're breathing it in, then some of them preferentially can just be peed out if we have the right nutrients. And others that go through the liver, they're going to get conjugated into bile. So they're actually what we should be binding in most mold illness is the bile, because that's where the mycotoxin is. Unless the person is very constipated, that doesn't come off the bile. So when we're doing a binder, we want to be thinking about what binds bile the best, because this is a breathing exposure, not an eating exposure. Yeah. So that's really what I'm doing with Alight Health Formulas. I got a lot of requests after I started training doctors to please just make this easy on us. No patient is going to buy 5 bottles of tincture. And for those that are listening, you can't see, but behind me are bottles and bottles of herbal blends that in my own practice, in my own medicinary, I'm so lucky because I have people that understand herbalism, and we're just mixing individualized formulas for people. But most doctors don't have that available. And then when COVID hit, people weren't even stocking stuff in their office because people weren't coming to the office. So it needed to be something that could be, ordered online, already mixed up. And at first that broke my brain a little bit, because I was like, wait a minute, but everyone's an individual, and there needs to be, an individual formula for each person. But when it came down to it, when I really sat down and created a spreadsheet of like, what are the nutrients that I'm seeing move the needle the most? What are the most supported in the literature, which with animal research? What are the main mycotoxins, symptoms, that kind of thing? We can nail down certain combined formulas and then apply them appropriately to the mycotoxin, and we can help a majority of people get better from mold and make it very simple, a 4-step process. None of this like mold is hard, no one ever gets better. That's just not been my experience. It is that we can lighten it up a little bit. It's scary. People get very sick. They can get sick. And then there's always that one family member that doesn't get sick at all. But people, that can be scary, but it doesn't have to be hard. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is Alight. That's why when we sat down to figure out what the name of it was, the company would be, was like, we want to lighten this conversation up around this condition. And so Alight it is.
Alight it is.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We talk about the people that don't get sick. I want to tell you a story.
Okay.
So a buddy of mine, he became a buddy of mine. He's now like a partner in one of the businesses that we have. Our kids go to the same school. So we met, we became fast friends. We even went on vacation together recently. My buddy's name is Logan Ryan. He's a 2-time Super Bowl champ, played for the Tampa Bay Bucks recently. Before that, the Patriots, the 49ers in the last Super Bowl. Very cool guy. When I tell you his mind was blown when I showed him the importance of air quality and what it can do for him. He was by no means sick. I mean, the guy played it at like the highest level, right? For the NFL. I did 2 simple things. I removed a moldy filter out of his HVAC unit. That is, who knows how long that was sitting there. I put an air purifier in his bedroom, and there's some issues where we found in his upstairs HVAC unit. He's replacing that. We found some mold growing around some vents and stuff like that. We're fixing that, but just minor things. Guy plays at a high level. Calls me after we did the first stage. Michael, I don't know, if this is like placebo or what, but I'm just going to tell you this. I had the best sleep of my life last night. After you did all those things, best sleep of my life. My kids, they've been like sick as dogs all the time. Flu this, flu that. It's just like sickness rushing through the house. And like, this is the first time my kids didn't complain of a stuffy nose in like the past few weeks. He goes, So I already believed you when you showed me the data, when I've seen the case studies, but now I'm a real believer because I actually got to experience it firsthand. His wife also was like feeling a lot better. She also was dealing with some allergy like stuff that seemed to dissipate. And, again, it's like now we're on the next phase. They're like, I'm taking the next step. Let's do some other things. And Logan's actually helping me We actually are like pitched the Jacksonville Jaguars. We have technology that's potentially going in the Jacksonville Jaguars now. I mean, the really cool stuff has come out of this relationship. But the point is, he wasn't sick. He didn't think he was sick.
Right.
His kids seemed to be a little bit more affected. His wife was a little bit more affected, but he felt what he thought was fine. But fine compared to what?
Right.
Like
right.
after he had the best sleep of his life, he was like, maybe I'm not fine, right? And so it's like, for me, I always look at what's normal. We don't really know what normal is. We just compare how we feel today against how we used to feel. And then we kind of normalize psychologically if that's how we should feel or not.
Right. You're older, you're beating up your body, all those little things that we can.
So I said, Logan, imagine if I had introduced air quality to you in your prime. I mean, you had a hell of a career, but like, who knows, right? Yeah. Sky's the limit. And I think it's when we look at human potential and human performance and just, I know a lot of people listening to this are like, hey, I wish I could just get out of bed in the morning, let alone, perform at a high level. But this is a testament to all the people that are in that same household that think they're fine. Mm-hmm. You might be fine compared to whatever you are comparing it to, but who knows how much it's affecting your potential. Even if you might be a better detoxer than the rest of your family, even though it might not be causing you the same severe symptoms as the rest of your family because you have a different genetic makeup and a different history of exposure and all the things, right? The food you eat, the air you breathe, the water you drink, everything's completely different. That's why humans are so unique. However, the point that I'm making here is you just don't know how it's actually impacting you. And so it's not until you get rid of it do you start to see the difference.
Right. And that's why I like working with your company on the remediation side, because not many, like most, don't. I think there's maybe 1% or 2% of companies that are paying attention to the mycotoxins. It's all fragment, which is important. There's connection to the fragments irritating, just like asbestos does in our lungs. It can irritate, same thing. Spores are not good. They're very allergenic. They can induce mast cells, lots of histamine problems, fungal overgrowth. They can move into your sinuses. And, in my practice, 80% of the symptoms are from the mycotoxins. And so if you don't go all the way to let's get rid of the spores and the fragments, let's pass, the dust test again. Let's do that again after we've remediated. And if the mycotoxins aren't taken care of, which is what you do with the fine particle cleaning and, taking care of all of it to the tiniest fragment level, not just a spore level, then, because the fragments are what carry around all these toxins, now you've just removed the toxin load. And I love working with athletes. That's when I learned working with an athlete when I was early in my career who was tracking his VO2 max. And he came in one day and he said, do you think cleaning up the mold could have done this? But my VO2 max just went up and I haven't changed anything else. And I thought that wasn't a movable number. I thought that was, was kind of before biohacking. That was kind of the thing, like that was your stable handicap, that wasn't a movable number. And his, he had a marked improvement, and we cleaned up his house. And that's what made the biggest difference for him. So I get asked all the time, people say, do I need to treat until I have 0 mycotoxins in my body? And my preference is a yes, because if you don't get these things out, just like in the building, if you leave stuff behind, even, the added thing that you did for him with the air filtration is so important, because we're going to have new things that come into the building all the time. You go outside, you can bring particulate in on your hair, on your clothes, on your pets, on shoes, all those things. Keeping the load down just hedges your bet to get rid of, to allow the body to be at its optimal. So I tell people, I try to get to 0 mycotoxins, which is possible. I've heard some doctors say, oh, no, we're just getting to lower or in the acceptable range, but I want to see it to 0, because we know that these things bioaccumulate in the body, which means they can store and they can get in the way of biological processes that just hamper the body and may set the stage for a health issue later down the line. Especially one of them that I worry about is dementia.
Yeah.
So I go for a 0. And it is possible. It's absolutely possible.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes work, right? I don't think anybody can argue that it takes work, and it takes showing up and being determined and making changes. But it's possible, right? You've seen it.
Yeah. Yeah. I see it all the time. That's my marker. I get them to 0, and then we start pulling away the support, and then we retest again at 3 months. So I'm like, okay, this 0 is your baseline now. But if we withdraw all the support, and we want to make sure their building obviously is testing clean, and they have symptoms come back, or we see the mycotoxins start to rise again in their body, that means they need to go see like a Dr. Dentist and get the mold out of their nose, or to work on biofilm or something like that. It means there's still a problem in the body that we need to address, because you shouldn't have mycotoxins.
So someone sent me a podcast recently, and it was 2 other mold IEPs, or indoor air quality professionals, and they were talking about how mold in the body is absolute nonsense. There's actually scientific terms. Sorry, not only scientific terms. There's medical terms for mold in the body, like aspergillosis comes to mind, right? And so it won't be too hard to combat this, but I want everyone to really be aware so that they're not misled. Mold obviously can impact the body through some of the cavities and mucous membranes that naturally occur in the body, and obviously can grow in the lungs, aka aspergillosis. So that is a threat that we obviously not to be scared of, but we want to be mindful of, because if we do all the things and we still have mycotoxins in the body, then obviously it's got to be colonized somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yep. And I test noses all the time with DNA testing, next generation PCR testing. And there's mold that shouldn't be there in people's noses. Dr. Joseph Brewer did a study in 2013, I think was when it was. I was treating mold at the time, and I was using, all the naturopathic things, and then antifungals for the whole body. So like systemic antifungals, so oral things. And this study came out, and it was my boom, this big moment where I realized I was missing the seed of all of the problems, which was the sinuses. And his study showed that, yes, if we tested everybody's sinuses, we would all have fungus in our sinuses. So we're always breathing this in. It's natural. You have fungal spores outside, and that's where you can hear people say, well, mold is everywhere. You're never going to avoid it. That is true. And the problem was the people that had been exposed to a water damaged or damp building and had a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, the mycotoxins in there, or the molds in their noses were making mycotoxins. And that was my big, oh my goodness, I am missing a big part of this. So now I use antifungals both in the nose and in the body. And that's when I learned about Dr. Dentists and send patients there when I think they have colonization to the point where we can't, it's so resident that it's actually rooted in. So not to scare people, but because this is totally treatable. But when the first patient I sent to him, they took a little fungal ball, very tiny, very teeny tiny. And the symptoms were dementia. So they had kind of a Parkinsonian walk. They were moving toward Parkinson's. So it was like early Parkinson's diagnosis, dementia. He takes this fungal ball out of this guy's nose, puts it on a sterile paper, and the colony continued to make mycotoxins even out of his body. Wow. So I'm like, that factory has been feeding your brain mycotoxins that could go through the blood-brain barrier, because it was black mold. It was a Stachybotrys fungal ball, which is very toxic, and they're very potent. So it takes a lot less of them to impact health than other types of mycotoxins. We got that out of his nose and did clean up with itraconazole in his nose and things like that. And this guy doesn't have Parkinson's anymore. No signs of dementia, no nothing. Wow. And yes, we want to get you to zero mycotoxins, because if we're successful doing that with the treatment, and then we test you again and it's starting to rise, there's something there that we need to be addressing. And, the doctors and the people that are saying, everybody has fungus in their nose. It's not, that's not the big deal. It's like, yes, that is true. Everyone has fungal spores in their nose. For some people, they are acting more pathogenically. They're not just residents that you happen to breathe in and you will sneeze out. They are actually rooted in their residence, and they're not supposed to be there. And it's all treatable. I mean, that's the big message. Like, as scary as all this is all manageable.
Well, I appreciate you clearing that up, because, this is one of those things where I wish those IEPs would have stayed in their lane and just inspected the house and, let the medical professionals give proper information out to people, because that's when you're misled, it spins you in circles, and then you're not handling the right things that need to be handled. And so I think that was very important to clear up. So I appreciate that. I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about the Mold IQ project.
Yes. It's so fun. This has been a dream of mine. As you know, as founder of Change the Air Foundation, Change the Air has funded this research project that we are starting with. Phase 1 is sort of a crowdsourced data gathering. So we have a website at moldiq.org that anybody can go to if you have been recently diagnosed with a mold-related illness. Fill out your symptoms and upload your lab tests. And the first phase is we are validating the clinical questionnaire that I've been developing over the past 2 decades in my practice to see, could we use a questionnaire to diagnose this condition? And it's been fascinating to see the research come through. I'm trying my hardest to not bring my own bias into the question set. So, but I can't help myself. Like, ooh, what about this? And what kind of symptoms does this cause? So I'm of course in there just data mining as much as possible. But we have a data analyst who, this is what they do. They look at data, the quality of the data. Are we reporting things in the right quantifiable way that we can actually pull meaningful information out of it? And it's been unbelievable. The very preliminary research, we have about 300 qualifying submissions. We need 1,000. So if you're listening and you can help contribute to this research, please do. That's at moldiq.org. It's completely free to participate. We don't reimburse you for anything. So, if you've already paid for that lab test, if you don't mind sharing those results, we would love to have the data. Because our goal with this is that if the questionnaire is seen as valid, that means that we can take the questionnaire data and start to ask really meaningful questions. First of all, we can prove that there is such a thing as human mycotoxicosis, because that's debated. Just like you were talking about with IEP staying in their lane. I mean, I have many doctors who argue with me about fungus being resident in the nose. That's why I have to test with PCR testing in different cultures, is like to prove it, Same thing, medicine is not accepting that mycotoxins that you breathe in can cause health issues. So this is a really important part of this research to prove that can happen. When that can be proven, then it's more than a mold allergy problem. Now people can start to see mold as not just a nuisance in a house or a visual blight that we can just paint over. Now we're talking about the toxin part, and we can start to change policy. And that's what we're both very passionate about, because this is a preventable problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it still blows my mind that people are arguing and fighting over this, but here we are, right? It's, doesn't matter how many people get hit with bullets. We're still saying, do bullets hurt people? I don't know. It's mind-blowing, but, here we are.
Yeah. Can I share some of our first?
I would absolutely love that. And I'm going to speak for the listeners and think that they're going to love that too.
I would love to share. This is the first time I've been able to share this information with anybody. So I'm so excited. Thank you for letting me share this. The preliminary first steps here. So let me just pull up my picture. These are the symptoms. Can you see that?
I can.
Okay. So the questionnaire is set up in 3 categories. So there's category 1, 2, and 3. And category 1 is things that are sort of, we see them commonly with mold, but they're not specific to mold. And they could be related to many other conditions. And then category 2 gets a little heavier weight because it's a little more specific to mold, a little more serious. And category 3 is high specificity to mold and more on the critical side. So category 1 gets weighted a little lighter. Category 2 gets a medium weight. Category 3, if you check one symptom, that counts as going toward your score. And then you get a mold score at the end. So this one in category 1, what's your first takeaway when you see that? Is that a lot of pie pieces or what?
It's a lot of pie pieces, but it's a manageable amount.
So if you are just listening to this and you're not seeing it, what we're looking at is a pie structure that is cut into teeny, teeny, tiny little pie slices. And most of the symptoms are anywhere from 2% to 3% of the whole picture of mold-related illness. And why is this important? This condition is getting missed all the time. And I get often asked, well, what is the symptom of mold-related illness? And this graphic proves that there are many, many, many symptoms. And that's why this condition is getting missed all the time. So category 1, all these teeny, teeny, tiny little pie slices, there's no one symptom. There's no keynote. There's no cardinal symptom. There's no big thing that we can say, oh, that thing, that's mold. And so that's why it gets missed.
Yeah, it's pretty evenly distributed.
Yeah, very evenly distributed. And that's the complexity of it. So, and here's category 2. We see that the one pie piece that sticks out a little bit more is difficulty thinking. So brain fog and cognitive problems. And then
I don't know that we could see category 2 on the screen yet.
Oh, you can't? Let's see. I might have to stop sharing before I can do that.
There we go.
How about that? Okay.
That works.
All right. So category 2, the 7% of people with mold-related illness in our study had difficulty thinking clearly or had memory loss from their exposure. And then interesting, next pie slice is that they react poorly to musty spaces. So basically, how does that rule out, or, how does that identify mold-related illness all on its own? It doesn't. That's the problem. The next one down is having irritable bowel symptoms. So we know that there's a microbiome impact, starting in the sinuses and seeding all the way down to the gut. So when we look at that, there again, we're seeing a pretty even distribution except for those few things that stand out. So how are we picking up mold-related illness? It's tough. And now when we go to category 3, that if we combine exposure to mold, either current or previous, that takes up 20% of the pie. So the big picture, what we're learning, and this is what a lot of us that are working in mold that we see, is that it's the air. It's the exposure that is the most important part of your entire history. And how do you figure that out if it's a hidden problem? That's where a lot of your listeners, their stories are like, it didn't smell moldy. We didn't know that leak was going to be such a big deal. I mean, there's a lot of those kinds of stories.
So the 20% of the people were aware that they had a current or past exposure.
Exactly. So the other 80 who have mold-related illness were not aware.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that wild? So we're learning a lot from this data, and this is just the first blush.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I would have expected that number to be, closer to 50-50.
I thought so too.
So 80% of the people are not aware until they actually get sick, essentially. And then they're forced to be aware by testing the place for hidden mold. Wow. Or
by seeing, the one question I wish we would ask is how many doctors did it take before you got your diagnosis? And the average in my practice is anywhere from 9 to 13 doctors before they came to see a mold specialist, because you rule out everything else, right? So that's why we're trying to validate this questionnaire. Is, it's a very simple instrument. You can have your patient at intake fill out, and if it's got a high score, we need to have that on your differential, and it's going to save people so much more time.
Wow.
Because then they can say, okay, this could be mold. We need you to test we're going to test your body for some of the things that we can see that point more arrows toward a current exposure. And then, you need to get to your building. So like the dust test, like just do that. That's not, it's a very little amount of,
it's a no-brainer
to find big information that could be impacting your health and your family. Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, I know it's not complete, but just getting that preliminary data is so insightful. My wheels are turning on, like, wow, how do we help that 80% of people get the information faster?
Yes, exactly.
Right. Because it's like they're continuing to get sick before they even realize. Right.
Yeah.
And that's completely avoidable.
And it's the backwards way. We don't wait till you're tragically sick and then find the cause. Let's figure that out. Totally avoidable, totally preventable problem. So I have this idea of, like, someday we'll have like little, on your smartphone, like a little spore counter and mycotoxin meter. You just like download the app and just take a look or something. Because air quality, it's huge. That's the 33 principle. The air is the most important piece. So
I know. I've been trying to tell people.
You bet. I know you have. Do you want to see one more picture?
Please.
Okay. I don't know how long you want to go, but okay. So assuming that the questionnaire is valid, so we have to first do that. So this may not be true. This may not have the meaning that we're seeing. Do you see this guy?
Yep, I sure do.
Okay. So we asked if they had been diagnosed by a doctor or not. And then some people didn't know, like they didn't fill out that part. So my mistake, I should have made that a required field. Yes or no? But when we look at the mold score based on the questionnaire, if you are scoring, you can get a probable diagnosis or you could get a possible. So we have it in 3 scoring sets. And a score of 5 or above is a probable. And when you get 10 and above, possible. 10 and above is a probable mold-related illness. If we see here that, like, we're not doing a very good job of diagnosing it either, so we should be able to see that if you don't have a diagnosis of mold, that green bar should be under 5. It means they're a healthy person. If they do have a diagnosis of mold, then we should be catching it between the 5 and 15. And as you see, some outliers were scoring in the 35s. So we need to do a much better job on our diagnostics.
I could see that, yeah.
Yeah.
You've got people that selected no, that clearly should have been diagnosed. You've got people that selected unknown and they have no idea. I mean, it's such a far-reaching problem because on one hand, you have people that are just refusing change. Right, as this science continues to evolve. I call this like the old guard mentality. You've got people that are just so used to doing things a certain way and they refuse to change, and they actually stand in the way of progress.
Yeah.
And what's on the other side of the door here is millions and millions and millions, if not billions, of people that are impacted by this. I mean, we've seen all the if you bother to look at all the studies and information out there, right? We know that at least 50%, according to the EPA and HUD study, right? At least 50% of homes have a visible sign of water damage. Visible.
Yes.
Which means 80% of those, they saw visible mold. So visible water, pretty high likelihood you've got a mold problem.
Yeah.
Right? The other 50% could be hidden problems. We have no way of quantifying that. We just know that the number has to be higher than 50%. And it proves it when you look at your research so far, I know it's preliminary, but 80% of those 300 people had no idea they were impacted by mold. No idea.
Right.
So that means that all of those areas were hidden. Hidden could be in a crawl space and they never saw it, or could be in an attic, they never saw it, could be in an HVAC and they never saw it. But hidden means it's not abundantly obvious.
Right.
And so for 80% of the people that are sick from mold illness,
with the mold lab test.
With mold lab tests. So they have clearly mold illness.
Yeah.
They're not feeling well. They've got the test to back it up. 80% of those people had no idea that they had mold. They had been exposed to mold.
Right.
So it was hidden.
Mm-hmm.
That tells us that this is a big problem.
Yeah.
This is a very big problem. That impacts a huge percentage of the probably the global population. I mean, I've traveled outside of the U.S. and I've seen mold outside of the U.S. Right, so it's not just a U.S. problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if we don't start to evolve and we don't start to get this progress, we're just going to continue to become sicker and sicker.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thought process on how sick we are today as a global population? I mean, the podcast is called "Never Been Sicker." You could prove me wrong. Have we never been as sick as we are today?
Never. I've been doing medicine for over 20 years, however many that is. I used to be able to help someone get rid of a food allergy, clean up their diet, get them moving, correct their sleep. My thanks go to the biohackers because they've really made that a lot easier. I used to spend 20 minutes telling somebody that they needed to breathe and go to bed on time. Like, those are really important things. Get an air filter, do some breathing, and drink water, go to bed on time. So those used to be very, they would move the needle for people, and it was just fine tweaks of correct their adrenal fatigue, get rid of the food sensitivities, get rid of the triggers, those kinds of things. That's not touching it anymore. And as people have gotten sicker, the complexity of their symptoms have gotten harder to deal with. And also that as our beautiful universe is, we've gotten more tools. So, we have more of these things like red light and peptides and bioregulators, IV therapy, but I've used IV therapy my entire career. It takes a lot more frequency, more intervention. And when I want to use these high intervention things, I have people who are so sensitive now that they literally have to sleep with their remedy for a week before they can actually think about even rubbing a little bit on the inside of their cheek to see if they're going to have a reaction. So it's a different world than I entered 20 some years ago. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, so we need progress.
Yep. And I'm hoping we'll see some change in environmental policy and food policy and those kinds of things. But, that's what we're working on, is also just changing mold policy, because that's the big hidden impact that it just doesn't get talked about. And when I see, the impact, and they get a diagnosis of one of a many, many, many things, that I'm like, but that's actually mold. Hypersensitivity pneumonitis, that's mold. I can just tell you, if they're not working in a coal factory or something where they're getting a lot of particulate matter that they're breathing, and the average person, because of how we're changing, as building policy, we're putting antifungals in paint. So we're creating superbugs. We're putting antifungals on our food because glyphosate kills the microbiome. So we have to nail it with a bunch of antifungals. So we have all of these fungi that are running around resistant to our immune systems. And then you build with moldy drywall and just flip the mold to the other side so that ugly mold isn't seen. And there's a real problem. Yeah. It's worse though, unfortunately. But I do believe that in the future and making it a better place. So yeah, that's what I'm working toward. And you,
Of course, I appreciate that. Progress is important. We need progress. It bums me out when people stand in the way of progress, obviously, because this is important. This is impacting a lot of different people, and I don't mind being challenged. I find it fun because it keeps me on my toes. I need to always,
yeah,
pay attention to what I say. I need to always, obviously, look up new information every day. Right. And so I don't mind that. And I don't mind being wrong. Right.
totally. I'm so with you. I was expecting to be proven wrong on even some of the symptoms that I had on my questionnaire. I was like, if there's anything that was never checked, I'm pulling it off, because that's one less thing someone has to read, think,
Right.
prove. I wanted this to prove some of my things wrong. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, up my game. Go
The
for
thing
it.
is, if you and I are right here on our hypothesis, right, we're talking about what's the flip side of this. The flip side of this, if we are right, billions, potentially billions of people can finally get the help they need
Yes.
just by acknowledging the problem.
Mhm.
Because until we acknowledge the problem as a society, we're not going to be working on solving it.
Right.
Right. And you're going to have, look, we're great people, but it's just you and I. We're two people
I know.
against, 8.5 billion people. We need more help.
Yes, we do.
Right. And so, it's when you look at it from this perspective of, how can we build a community of people that come together that are saying, hey, we have never been sicker than we are today, and I won't stand for it anymore.
Yeah.
Let's start looking at some of these things that we've been so resistant to studying.
Right. Right.
And it's like, you have people, the naysayers, right? The naysayers in the medical community or the science community that say, no, it's not possible. Or they don't say it's not possible. Sorry. They say it's not proven. Okay.
Prove it.
Well, then let's prove it. Because if it's not proven, then one way or another, if it's no, then let's say the no.
Exactly.
But you're standing in the way of progress by saying it's not proven and then not doing something to prove it one way or another.
Right. Right. There's a phrase in medicine: the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So in other words, just because there's not evidence that fungal balls in the nose cause Parkinson's, that doesn't mean that that is not happening.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think I love that idea. Like, okay, it's not proven. Put money, energy, science into proving it one way or the other, just so we have an answer. But people are sick and they're not getting answers. That the diagnostic chart that I showed you, these were all people that knew they had mold-related illness, but there were that many of them that had to self-diagnose.
Yeah.
The only ones that were were people where a doctor was literate enough or brave enough, if they're in an HMO where they're not allowed to diagnose something like mold-related illness. One of the problems with this condition is we don't have diagnostic codes. So that's the magic way you get insurance coverage and you get, accepted as a true condition as you get your diagnostic code. Dr. Campbell has said this is really brilliant. He says, as soon as we get diagnostic codes, suddenly people will find it because they can click it on their EMR.
Right.
Yeah. So that's part of the problem, so people are self-diagnosing, finding their own solutions, finding their own lab testing, doing it on their own, and then bringing it to the doctor, which is the wrong direction. People should be getting support from their medical practitioner. But hey, Get the answer how you can.
Get the answer how you can.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your time here today, talking through all these things with me. It's never have enough time to be able to chat and go through all these things. Cause there's so much to cover and it's so exciting, to sit here and be with you today. Where can people find you, support you, and everything in between? Cause you need support, you need help. It's the only way things get done. And so how can anybody listening who is really inspired by what you're doing help support you, and where can they find you?
All right. So first thing I'll plug the study is moldiq.org to participate in the study. We have a video there of how to participate. It's very simple. Takes 5 minutes of your time. So we would love that data if you're listening to this anytime around when this is being launched. And then for me personally, and my educational endeavors is drcrista.com. That's drcrista.com. That supports funding my time to be able to do this research. So I'm trying to work myself out of a job. I don't want mold illness to be a thing. It's totally preventable. So the more that you participate in my courses, and hopefully, if someone is sick and you're looking for support, I'm sorry about that, first of all. But I have tons of supportive information, education, specific supplement bundles that get you through certain situations, like oxalates, like salicylates, like some of these things that are really these oddball conditions that come from mold. And then my new pet project with Alight Health Formulas. That's alighthealthformulas.com, all one word together. And that's where you can find those precision mycotoxin treatments that are going to take you through an easy pathway to get better faster. So if you know what's in your building, we know what mycotoxins those molds make. So we can take that data and you can get right on the treatment protocol that's going to speed your healing and get those buggers out of your body.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time here today.
Thank you.
We'll be having you again on soon, believe me.
I love chatting with
excited
you.
to see the research come together. Please, if you're listening, go to moldiq.org, support that research. If you've done testing, it's all you need is a test to show that you have mold exposure, and you need to answer some basic questions, right? And so not rocket science, and it would help a lot to get this diagnostic tool created.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, and see you soon.